Hello, and welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We're glad that you have joined us for this episode where we will be talking about Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, on its 25th anniversary. It came out in May in 1999, so we thought this would be fun to revisit. This is certainly one of the most maybe looked down upon Star
hmm
Wars films, so we figured it might be nice to go and revisit it. And when I say we, I'm obviously talking about myself and my good friend Caleb. How you doing, Caleb?
I'm great. How are you doing today, Mark?
I'm good. I can't wait to dig into this and see like where you found yourself landing watching it again. What after I don't know how many. For me, it was at least a decade
Yeah,
since I last watched it. So
yeah.
it's going to be fun to talk about it. But first, we want to let y'all know that we are brought to you by ProgressiveChristianity.org. It really is an exceptional place to go for progressive Christian resources. We really highly encourage you to go and follow them there. They have a free newsletter or sign up for that. Also, us, the Moonshine Jesus Show. Make sure you're following us on Facebook and also any place that you get your podcast. Go ahead and sign up and make sure you're getting that downloaded so you'll get notified when a new show is up and posted. And finally, we need to make sure that you are aware that one of our favorite things to do is to spoil sci-fi fantasy fiction movies and
Absolutely.
serial shows. And so we're going to do our very best to spoil it. At this point, it's really weird to be saying spoil on a movie that was made 25 years ago. But hey, who
It's
knows?
fair
Who
game.
knows? It should be fair game. But before we dig into it, let's dig into some drinks. Uh, what themed drink did you decide to go with, sir?
So I think one of the best parts about this movie is Darth Maul. I think he's kind of a
Sure,
fun
he's
character, and so
absolutely
I've got a Darth Maul teeny, and I've kind of
nice.
created this like a lightsaber here. Can you see it?
Oh, I like
I've
it.
kind of
Yeah. You got
yes,
the
yes.
red
So
and this little black
yes.
lining or something in
Yes.
there.
I
Right.
yeah, it's got yeah, it's I've got uh vodka and some cherry liqueur in here to get the red, and I've kind of made my
Right.
own lightsaber here, but I'm going to have to
Nice. Oh yeah.
dissect it to actually try
Take
to
it off. Well, I went with a more general
Yes.
Star Wars thing. It doesn't actually show up in this, but I have a milk jug of Bantha milk.
Ooh, fun.
So
Yeah.
I popped the top on my Bantha milk. This is one part coconut rum, one part amaretto, one part blue curacao, milk, heavy cream, and a little vanilla extract. So
Ooh,
uh,
fun.
I always wanted Bantha milk, so I thought this is the perfect
Ooh, great
excuse
time.
to do it, right? So
Yeah.
cheers, sir.
Cheers, Mark.
I'm going to need more Bantha milk.
Mm.
That's good. All right, we'll catch you all on the other side of this drop.
Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show, where today we are talking about Star Trek episode or Star Wars. Sorry, that's a
Mhm.
sin. Star Wars episode
Wow.
1, The Phantom Menace.
Remember,
And this
folks,
is
direct
the
your hate mail to Caleb
I
Lyons.
know, that's right. Oh my gosh. Oh, what am I doing? What am I doing? Okay, look, this was
Yeah,
released 25 years ago, and we're
indeed.
celebrating 25th anniversary. And 25 years ago, actually, this month, I think. And so,
Yes, it was May of
Phantom
1999.
when May of
May of
1999,
1999.
like
Yep,
May 19th or something? Do you remember the date?
I think that was about right. It was the.
Yeah.
I think that's right. Yeah.
I should know. I think I was standing outside the theater that day. It should be
Well, I was standing outside the theater at about 5 hours before midnight because back then they didn't pre-sell
yeah,
tickets. You had to stand
that's
in
right.
line, get there early
Yeah.
enough so that you could get the ticket to see the midnight show.
Yes, that's right. Yes, a whole different world of
Oh,
fandom. You
indeed,
had to be committed. You couldn't.
man.
You're right. You couldn't
Yeah,
just get on the internet. So look,
yeah.
Phantom Menace was the beginning of the prequel trilogy, and we
Yeah.
got to see the origins of Anakin as well as others like Padme, Qui-Gon Jinn, and Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah.
And look, Mark, Star Wars fans have kind of a love-hate relationship with George Lucas. And I
Sure.
think Phantom Menace is a great example of maybe why that is. And
Definitely.
at the time the movie came out, it got a lot of criticism. But we
Yeah.
look back at them in more recent years. I don't know, have more favorably in retrospect. And so
Yeah.
I'm curious, with
Mhm.
everything that we know, having seen all the prequels, having all the sequels, having seen all the
Yeah.
other Star Trek or Star Wars stuff, I am having a hard time with that. All the other Star Wars stuff
Right.
that has
It's hard
come
to keep
out.
up.
Tell me, how do you feel about Phantom Menace revisiting it all these years later?
All right. I definitely so my experience was going into the theater. It was crazy. Like
Yeah.
when bam and Star Wars comes up,
Yep.
the theater went nuts, and I did too. There was so much hype. We were all so excited, and then I left really unsatisfied. And
That's a
so,
common reaction, I think. I've
yeah,
heard that
I
story
think
before.
I think I now land somewhere in between those.
Okay. Yeah.
I really appreciate you just mentioned all of the so much origin kind of
Mhm.
setups that happen, which I didn't appreciate enough because I still believe the same thing I believed when I left that theater.
Mhm.
Too much Jar Jar Banks. There's just, I mean, there
Is it
just is.
I mean, is there ever too much Jar Jar Binks? I mean,
There is
can you get
always
enough?
there's definitely too much Jar Jar Binks. Uh, and I was hoping that I would feel differently about it. I did not. I did think that the character mattered more to the story than I originally thought.
Yeah,
I definitely thought early on, man, I wish we wouldn't have had to have that character. Oh, I kind
yeah,
of get it now. It makes a lot of sense. But, there's still so much other issues.
yeah,
I will say that a lot of the special effects that happened were brand new. And
yeah.
considering they were brand new, they really hold up reasonably well. There are certain things not so much, but like the pod races, man, is still, in my opinion, that segment is still one of the best pieces of film around. It's just
Mm,
exciting. It's engaging. The graphics are great. There's just so much great about it. There's also some bad parts about it. The thing that I never can get away
yeah,
from with Star Wars is George Lucas's dialogue.
yeah. Yeah,
It's just so great. Like there are parts of it that
it's
are
bad.
just so stilted and
Yeah,
stiff. And then there's other parts where he almost seems like he's a philosopher. And
yeah,
it's so hit like it's either on or completely
yeah,
off.
yeah.
I mean, what do you think about that?
I think in terms of the dialogue to start with, that I think it's better in this movie than it is in the next one, and I think particularly
Uh,
the romantic scenes between Anakin
oh my
and Padme are just cringeworthy. I mean, they're bad
in part two, in episode two.
in episode 2. Yeah, so to say that episode 1,
What
I
is
think
this
is
line about? I really don't like sand or something like that. Something what?
what, so, yeah, I mean, the dialogue's bad in this one, but I it's worse. You know, I think that the good thing about episode 1 is that
Yeah,
it introduced a whole new generation to Star Wars. And
absolutely.
there, I was what, 14 when this came out, and
Oh
I had
God,
all I know. Sorry, Mark. I was
my
14 when
first
this
child
came
had
out.
just been born. My first child had just been. No, no, no. I'm wrong. My second child had just been born.
So I was 14, I was in middle
Uh,
school, and this was, for
eh,
a lot of us, kind of our first real deep dive into Star Wars, and it kind of got me and others interested in it, I think.
yeah,
And even, watching it this weekend, it was her first real Star Wars, and she loved it. And so
yeah,
I think that there's that to be said for this movie.
Sure. And that was the
And
coolest thing,
I
by the way. I saw your Facebook post of
yeah,
y'all at an outdoor, like, makeshift theater with a
yes,
pretty large screen for that, with you
yeah.
and your daughter. Like, that's so perfect and beautiful. And it's everything that's great about Star Wars.
It
The
was.
very,
Yes.
the very first Star Wars movie, I was
Yeah,
slightly younger than that, maybe 8 or so.
yeah,
But my dad took me to it, and it was a real kind of he took me and my brother, and it was really
yeah,
like kind of a father sons thing. And
yeah,
that is one of the wonderful pieces of Star Wars, to share it generation through generation, because it is
yeah.
such a timeless story.
Yeah, and it was really cool because there were all these kids running around. They all had lightsabers. They were having
Yeah,
lightsaber duels. They were acting out the movie and stuff like that.
which
And
is exactly what
it,
happened at the midnight show at most places that it opened. People were fully in costume, lightsabers, having the fights as well. So it's cool. 25 years later, we see it repeat as, as George Lucas likes to say, history rhymes. It's like
yeah,
poetry; it rhymes, and there's
yes,
some of it right there. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, that's one of the cool things about Star Wars is that now we are going multi-generations here that have
yeah,
enjoyed new Star Wars movies, obviously of varying quality,
yeah.
but we've all got to experience those together. And so I was struck by some really good things in this movie as well.
Hmm.
Um, and the pod racing scene, I think that you
Gosh,
mentioned was good. I think lengthy, but it was a
yeah.
good
It might have
scene.
been a few minutes too long, but I'm
But
kind
it
of
was
glad it
good.
was.
It was good, and it was
Yeah.
really the first time that we'd really been able to see the pods race quite like
Hmm.
that. And
Yeah.
I think the final lightsaber duel with Qui Gon
Oh,
Jinn and Obi-Wan and Darth Maul was so
right.
good,
Yeah.
and I was reminded after going back and watching the original trilogy that like a lot of the lightsaber duels that we got to see were not full on lightsaber duels, right? You got
Yeah.
like an old guy fighting a cyborg and
All right.
in episode 4, and then you've got Luke and Darth Vader kind of
We
fighting,
don't
but
really
Darth
want to
Vader
hurt
does.
each other.
That's right,
I mean, this
and
is
the
the first
same.
time where we've got people who are really being aggressive
They're
towards each other.
really into it. They really you got people
Yeah.
in their prime, and special
I think it's
effects
some
have
of
come
the
along
best
so
fight
far.
scenes in most movies.
Mm,
I mean,
yeah,
it's really exceptional. The choreography on these
yeah,
fight scenes, the speed at which they do it,
yeah.
is really impressive. It genuinely is.
It's really tight. It's very carefully choreographed,
Yeah,
and it's exciting. Even when you know
it
what's
is.
going to happen, it's exciting.
Yeah,
And I think you're right. One of the best fight scenes we've seen. And so I think
yeah,
that part is really good.
yeah.
Um,
And
and so
the John Williams score
in the score,
is
you're right. That is
it's
phenomenal.
incredible.
Yeah.
It's one of his best scores for this movie.
Yes.
It's just unreal how good it is.
Yes, and the Duel of the Fates
Oh
is
wow.
introduced here, and a
Hmm.
fantastic score. And I was reminded as I was going back through and looking at things that happened in the lead up to the
Yeah.
original release, that radio stations were playing that at
Oh yeah.
before the show came out, and they were
Absolutely.
doing it like at a certain time, and so people would tune in to listen to the score.
Uh huh.
And yeah, John Williams knocks it out of the park like he does
Absolutely.
every
Yeah.
time. But even things as beautiful as like the Skywalker theme not coming out fully until Anakin is in the fighter and he's going
Yeah.
around and I think that's beautiful.
It
Um,
is.
Mark, tell me, you mentioned the CGI and you feel like that holds up pretty well. Say more about visual effects. What do you think
Well,
about the
I
visual
think
effects 25 years
some
later?
of it holds up very well, considering that a lot of it was literally invented as they were filming.
Yeah,
There were because being a Star Wars fan over the
yeah,
25 years, I've watched making of and all of that kind of thing, and literally there were parts of it where they were filming it, going, "Are we going to do this practical?" And they said, "Well, let's film it practical," and
yeah,
we're not sure how to do it non-practical, but we'll
yeah,
start working on that. And so as they're filming it, like practical suits and that kind of thing, they're working on it. So when you consider how new it was and how bad CGI in other movies that came out after it was, I think that they really achieved a kind of a high level. There were a few things where it felt a little cheesy and a little off, like it might have been rushed for one reason or the other. But there were other moments like that pod race holds
Yeah.
up today. It is
Yeah.
just brilliant. It looks incredible. And yeah, it's everything that CGI should be used for. You
Hmm.
can't recreate that practically in any realistic way that's going to be engaging and not kind of like look like a model or look like whatever.
Right.
I think that they really just blew it out of the water considering it's 25 years old. They
Yeah.
did fine. Jar Jar Binks looks a little goofy and some of the other kind of things, but when they get underwater as they're traveling through the planet,
Yeah.
some of those giant fish that they bring in looking absolutely stunning for being early CGI. So I think they did all right. I mean, was that your experience with the CGI, or did you think that there was more places that were kind of like cheesy and off?
Well, I think certainly it's cheesier than it was 25 years ago, but that's to be expected, right? I think that's
Yeah,
one of
yeah,
the great things about George Lucas founding ILM, and with the original
yeah,
trilogy to create these special effects that did not exist before he
yeah.
created them. I mean, in a very real way, move CGI forward so much in order
Oh,
to
nice.
create this vision. And he was only willing to do the prequels because he felt like technology had advanced sufficiently that he could really bring them to life. And I think
Hmm.
certainly he did. One of the places in the original or in this kind of prequel trilogy that I think that it really comes home is whenever we get to see Yoda do the lightsaber battle for the first time. Obviously not in Phantom
Yeah.
Menace, but I remember the theater just erupting in applause whenever
Oh yeah.
Yoda comes out and wields a lightsaber for the first time. So yeah, I think it holds up pretty good. Hey, I want to ask you a question before we end this segment. Something
Yeah.
that I've been wondering about. So this movie was controversial and continues to
Right.
be kind of controversial. It has divided fans, but it got a lot of hate. And even people who have retrospectively said maybe it wasn't so bad. I think we've seen maybe some things that are worse. It got a lot of hate at the time. And not just the movie, but the actors in the movie
Yeah.
got a lot of hate. And so I'm
They
thinking
did.
specifically about the person who played Jar Jar Banks, who was
Yeah.
and is immensely unpopular as a character. And so that actor revealed that he contemplated suicide after this. And the young kid who played Anakin Skywalker has said that he got
Yeah.
bullied in school and stuff to the point that he just left acting. And so I'm curious, Mark, what this says about fandom. I mean, you and I
Yeah.
both love Star Wars. How do we keep fandom healthy, and when does it go too
Mm.
far?
But that's obviously an example of it going too far. I don't know how we keep it healthy other than people actually being decent human beings and
Yeah,
recognizing that they played the role the best they could. A lot of the fault of it was the imagination of how it was going to go off and what it was
right.
going to be like. There's so much that goes into movies, and maybe there's not enough people who recognize that a character being coming off poorly,
Yeah,
it's not just the actor, it's the
right.
writing, it's the
Mhm.
director, it's the way that they edit it, it's the lighting, it's there's so many pieces that go into whether or not that role comes off. um, and this human instinct to attack the things in a simplistic way that we feel like are wrong or off or have disappointed us in a severe way, rather than recognizing that this is the movie, man. And it's not going to impact your life the next day in terms of how you go through your day. And I don't know how we get people. I mean, I think the church it has a large role in that, but also just people in general have. That's one of the things the church can do and help with. But so can mosques, and so can all kinds of different areas, and even folks outside of religion. There's so much work that we need to do at teaching each other to simply be decent human beings.
That's a great point, Mark. And I think if we can just enjoy things for what they are, and
Right.
even if it's not perfect, to say, "Hey, look, this was still I still got to see a Star Wars movie, and I
Yeah,
think certainly bullying people is not a great way to
it's
let
never okay.
yeah, never okay for fandom to take that
Yeah.
kind of avenue. So I would love to talk more about this. You and I could talk about Star Wars all day, but we got to talk about
All day.
theology and politics. So let's take a quick break. Let's come back and let's dive into the Theopolitico stuff.
Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Welcome back. You're joining us for our Theo Politicos segment. So, I got a list of things for us to talk about here. I want to start off with some quotes, I think, and get your response and thoughts on it. So, for all of his faults with dialogue, which we've already talked about a little bit, uh, Lucas does write some pretty memorable lines sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it even sounds like what I was talking about earlier. Sometimes it even seems like high-end philosophy almost. Sort of like the classic line that we get here: fear leads to anger, anger leads
Yeah.
to hate, hate
Mm-hmm.
leads to suffering. Uh, I'm curious. Do you think that line is that a universal truth, or are there exceptions? And what does it say about humanity?
Yeah, so that left me as it was said, and like I
Mm.
said, it's been a while since I've watched this movie, and
Yeah.
so I didn't remember it, but the delineation there, it was one of those moments where I thought, do I believe that or not?
Right. Yeah.
Is and so I think that uh, that can be true, and it can also not necessarily be true. I mean, people respond to different
Hmm.
situations in different ways, but I think fear can make us act irrationally. I don't think it's always
Yeah.
anger, but I think fear can make us act in all kinds of rational ways. And I think about the way that fear is used by people in political power to get
Hmm.
to get people to make really bad decisions. And I'm not sure
Yeah.
that it's necessarily out of anger, but I think that people can vote against themselves, or people can vote to harm others because we use fear in a way that makes people nervous about their own security or their own safety, and
Hmm.
do things that they might not ordinarily do.
Yeah.
And I think that whenever you're talking about um, anger, I think that anger can frequently lead to hatred if it's not controlled. And I
Yeah.
think even we don't have to even universalize it or talk about big issues. We can talk about it, even personally, like people that we are angry with. That like the
Hmm.
longer you are angry at someone, the more harm that does to your personal soul, and the more
Sure.
likely you are to move into this place where you're even hating someone. And I think that causes suffering, maybe for the other person, but primarily for ourselves. So I think there's some truth to that, but I
Yeah.
don't think I don't think it moves quite in that line, in the way that we're encouraging.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think it is oversimplified. I think it's interesting as you see the progression of the line. It gets more true the further into it you get. It
Hmm.
is more true that hate leads to suffering
Yeah.
than it is true that anger leads to hate. And it is more true that anger leads to hate than it is true that fear leads to anger. I think it could benefit, the whole thing could benefit with the word can. Fear can
Mm,
lead to anger,
yeah.
anger can lead to hate, hate
Mm,
can lead to suffering.
good point.
But I do think that the last part, hate leads to suffering,
Yeah.
is maybe the most important part of it. Because sometimes fear leads to positives. Sometimes
Mm,
fear handled correctly, processed in a decent way. Sometimes fear actually helps you navigate your way through a situation that could be harmful. So
Yeah.
I think that was a little bit further off. Hate, however, almost always leads to some degree of suffering for someone,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that part of it, I think, is almost, not quite, but almost a universal truth.
Mm.
And every time we see hate, I think it's important for those of us who actually value humanity to start looking for where the suffering is. When
Yeah.
I see hate, where is the suffering that's resulting from this? Because while I do need to respond to the hate, maybe most importantly, immediately, I need to respond to the space where that hate is creating suffering. So it's a great line. It's very memorable, and it kind of hits you when it's said because it seems so
Uh-huh.
real until you really kind of are a little reflective about it. Then you kind of go, okay, it's mostly true, and it has
Right.
some real value. But I think that, yeah, I think can would help a lot. Fear can,
I,
anger can.
yes, it can. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
it can. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm with you.
And
I agree.
another quote that I'm
Yeah.
curious about what's being said, what where he's trying to be almost philosophical, and curious about whether you think he was onto something or not. Uh, Qui-Gon says to Shmi, Anakin's mom, "You should be very proud of you, son. He gives without any thought of reward." And Shmi's response is, "Well, he knows nothing of greed."
Mm.
Is willingness to give rooted in not being greedy? And
Mm.
how does your thoughts on that effect apply to help you understand poverty in the world, hunger in the world, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think you can have a lot and still give a lot, and but I do think that that greed is a fundamental problem, and I think it comes out of this mindset of scarcity, like that
Right.
there's just not enough, and so I've got to accumulate as much as I can for myself, and so that I don't want to give any of that to someone else because then I might not have enough. So I think it's also
Yeah.
tied into that fear uh,
Hmm.
instinct. And so certainly I think greed can be a part of that. But I also think that sharing is something that is learned. And I think certainly the Christian tradition has a lot to teach us about that, about
Oh yeah.
one, that there's
Hmm.
enough for everybody if we
Hmm.
will just share it. And that we ought to always be practicing sharing. And so I
Yeah.
think that one thing that's helpful is that when we recognize that uh, all we have is ultimately not ours, but is ours in common. And so when
Hmm.
one person has too much, we have more than our fair share, and
Yeah.
ought to share that with others.
Yeah.
And so I think again I would give it a I think it's kind of true. But but not real true. What do you
Yeah.
think?
No, I completely agree. Right, it is the false idea of not having enough in the world,
Mhm.
and needing to hoard and not
Yeah.
to share. I mean, poverty and world hunger. We
Yeah.
have things that could end those. Our problem is our
Right.
willingness to share, and our willingness to share is in some way rooted to this false idea that there
Yeah.
isn't enough, that there is a
Mm.
limited resources in those areas, and the reality is there just isn't. There is
Yeah.
more than enough, as my
Right.
friend Brian McFarland put in a song that he wrote, as there's
Mm.
more than enough for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have an issue with trying to learn and figure out how to share it,
Yeah.
and we got a lot of work to do. And yes, I agree. The Christian Church, one of our main calls is to try to help us understand how this is all for all of us, and how connected we are, and how important it is that if one of us isn't okay, none of us are okay, and we have to do a better
Right.
job
Yeah.
of getting to that point. I want to sneak in one more quick question. We only got about two
Yes.
minutes left in this segment. We'll go over a little bit if we need to. I think this is important, particularly in this election year. Um, Palpatine he is lying and manipulating for his desired outcome, with essentially no real concern for most of the people that he is supposed to represent, even as he pretends, and I do mean pretends like he does. He even goes as far as saying, if I'm elected, I promise to put an end to corruption. So I think you're having some internet connection problems, and we'll see if you're going to make it back. But I was going to ask you if you heard any echoes in that of anything in U.S. politics. And I'm going to go ahead and answer it myself and see if we get you back online before that happens. And I'll bring the question back to you. And it'll be interesting to see if you come back with the same answer that I have. Um, yeah, I think obviously politics in the U.S. has unfortunately become far too much about lying and manipulating, ultimately just for desired outcomes of those who have money, those who are elected officials, and the companies and corporations that pump money into it to get their desired outcome. But I could not help but hear in that statement of, if I'm elected, I promise to put an end to corruption. Um, I heard echoes of the first election between Trump and Biden, where Trump says that he's going to empty the swamp. And it was sort of chilling to me to hear that difference, that similarity, and the fact that in the movies, that kind of a line, shadowed by the reality that this is a character that is only saying what is necessary to be elected. Um, and then seeing it happen with one of our elected officials who said, I'm going to empty the swamp, and in a lot of folks' opinion, did the exact opposite of that, really kind of made it worse, and never really clearly meant what he was saying. So I don't know. You're still offline, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to play the drop here, and we're going to take I'm actually, it looks like you're back on, so I'm bringing you back on. I have been killing for time, and this is going to be interesting here. This is going to be interesting. Obviously, your
should I
internet.
just answer your question? Should I just assume I know what the answer is and start
Did you
talking?
hear that? I answered the question first, and I said it'll be interesting to see if you have a similar answer to me. So let me give you the question again
Okay.
and see where you go. So Palpatine is, he's lying and manipulating for his desired outcome with absolutely no real concern for most of the people that he's supposed to represent,
Mhm.
even the people that he pretends he does. And he has this line, and I'm wondering if you've heard echoes of this line in anything in American politics, where he says,
Ah,
if I'm elected, I promise to put an end to corruption." I wonder if you've heard that, and what you think about the idea in American politics is, like I said, him lying and manipulating for his desired outcome, and saying one thing but actually practicing another. But
well, I mean,
first start with that quote.
okay, yeah. So I mean, first of all, most every politician has always said that there's corruption in politics, and I'm going to
Yeah,
weed it out.
absolutely.
And shocker, none of them ever does. But I think
What?
you thought it was all fixed, right? You thought the whole system
Yeah,
had been fixed.
yeah, of course.
Yeah. I think though clearly with Trump, I mean this is his whole thing, right? Like it's better not to have any political experience because all politicians are corrupt and I'm going to weed it all
Yeah,
out, and ends up being the most corrupt of all of them, of course. And
of
so
course.
and so yeah, I think that yeah, certainly Trump is a Palpatine kind of character in our
Yes, he
own
is.
with
Yes, he is.
I think ambitions of
Yeah,
being kind of an emperor, the evil emperor. I think we could see
yeah,
Trump being kind of the hood. He wouldn't even bother to wear a hood though, and disguise. So yeah, I think that we see that in U.S. politics. I think that we see it recently. I think we're about to see it real clear in the run up to this next election. I think we're going to see Trump coming through and claiming that he's going to clear house. You know, what is it,
Right.
drain the swamp or whatever he thinks he's
That was
going
it.
to do.
That was it. We both went to the same line. I'm going to empty the swamp. And for me, if I'm elected, I promise to put an end to corruption. I immediately heard Trump say, "I'm going to drain the
Drain the
swamp." And
swamp.
yeah. All right.
That's-
Well, because I needed to stall, we have gone significantly over on this segment. So I'm going to
yeah.
go ahead and throw in the quick drop here. On the other
Okay.
side, we're going to come back with our favorite segment, the "Make Me Look Stupid" segment.
Hello and welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We are entering our final segment, the Make Me Look Stupid segment, and a special thanks to those of you who have hung out even as I dropped in and out of the last segment. I appreciate that, but the good news is I was the one dropping in and out, so you got to listen to Mark, and that was,
I'm not sure that that's a good.
just wonderful.
I will say this: it is proof. Like I think sometimes people say that it's that we agree too much, and that it feels like we're just listening to the other person and agree. This was a perfect example. Caleb had no idea what my answer was, and basically
It came up
gave
with
the
the same
same
thing.
answer. It's just we kind of see the world in similar ways. So
Well, we
I
do.
needed
That's
to
why we
throw
get
that
along
in.
so well. I mean, that's kind of
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay. So Make Me Look Stupid is a segment where we like to ask each other questions to maybe make each other look stupid or maybe just have a fun question. We have something we're wondering about. And I've got something I am wondering about today, and I need
All
your
right.
perspective on it, Mark. So Jar Jar Binks, unpopular character.
Yes.
And there are a lot of comparisons to when George Lucas kind of got on the toy bandwagon with the Ewoks in the
Right.
original trilogy. So here's my question: which is worse, the Ewoks or Jar Jar Binks?
There is no comparison. Jar Jar Binks. I mean, the Ewoks were at least like they were cute. There was a statement being made about
Yeah,
a group of folks that are slight and small coming together, not having high-end technology, but banding together and using the resources they have to overcome an evil empire. There is a great story there. Jar Jar Binks was intentionally, and George Lucas has basically said this, a big role that he was playing was comic relief. He was trying to put more
yeah,
comedy into Star Wars,
yeah,
and I appreciate that that's what he's trying to do. I just didn't think it worked.
yeah.
It never quite worked. I do appreciate the character of Jar Jar and how he moves the story along and
Yeah.
the role he plays in that more than I did the first several times I watched it this time through. But no, I think Jar Jar is definitely much worse than the Ewoks. What about you?
Jar Jar's a million times worse than the Ewoks. I just felt like we need to clarify that because there's a lot of
No,
comparisons there.
that's fair.
I think
Yeah.
there's also like there's this whole notion, right, that whether or not you appreciate the Ewoks depends on when you watch the movie and what age you were when you watched the movie.
That's fair.
And so like if you watched that before you were kind of entering adolescence, you have
Yeah,
a lot more fun nostalgia
positive.
of the
I
Ewoks.
watched it when I was 8 or 9, and I thought, well, no, that's the second movie. So that's probably 10, 12,
Yeah.
13. But I loved it. Loved them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I watched it when I was a kid too, because I mean, obviously, I had access to the original trilogy. We watched
Yeah,
them
yeah,
all, and I liked them when I was a kid. And so even like as I watched it later, I'm like, that wasn't great. It's
yeah.
still I had some fond memories, but I have not heard anyone anyone say, "Oh, Jar Jar," like I've got some fond memories of Jar Jar. Like even my daughter, right? She's 8 years old, and when she watched it for the first time over the weekend, and she was like, "But what was with that Jar Jar guy?" I'm like,
Yeah.
she came up with her own Jar Jar impression, and so
Good for her.
yeah, so I think that I think Jar Jar, yeah, agreed
Yeah. Yeah.
by far.
And
Yeah,
if you want to put something funny or cute or whatever into the movie,
yeah,
um, I think if they give a larger story like the Ewoks did, then that's fine. Jar Jar just didn't quite. If you're going to do it, I kind of like it in the sequels,
yeah,
the Porgs. They're
yeah.
cute, they're a little bit silly, but they're not central. They're just this fun little side thing,
Right.
and you're going to sell tons of them. You're going to sell that product like
Yes.
mad, but you're not going to ruin the story by making them important in it. I don't know.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
my question for you. I do think the writing on this show was not particularly good, even in the way they set things up and stuff. And I have two or three questions that are all about what? What? And I think what I'm going to ask you is, all right, so when, why is there a kid-sized helmet in the N1 Starfighter when Anakin gets into it and ends up destroying the spaceship that's controlling the android? I mean, he gets in and there's already like what were they flying with kids? How what
They
the
were they were recruiting children early. That's the they were starting recruiting early. They were training them, and no, it's just a little lazy. It's kind of lazy writing, and not thinking things through really well. I think they knew they wanted to get him they wanted to get him in the fighter, and they wanted to go out, and
yeah.
so they just had the. I mean, I guess you could say, well, people have different sized heads, and maybe he just happened into the
Having to get into one where
or maybe
the
look,
alien happened to be a smaller alien and
right,
maybe an Ewok flew it
an
beforehand.
Ewok. Yeah, no, look, this is a space age, Mark. The helmets are probably auto fitting. Like you put them
Right.
on, they
As
probably
soon as he
melt to the
touched
head.
it, it resized. And so
Yeah,
when he brings it into the frame, it's already the right size.
that's right. That's right. I'm sure that's what it was. I'm sure it wasn't
Yeah,
just
yeah.
lazy
That's
writing.
that's bound to be it. Yeah, sure.
Unless you have another explanation, Mark. Is there a reason
No,
why the
absolutely
force
not. It's
brought
poor
it
writing.
there?
It is. It is. It is. I gave you the answer when I set it up. It's poor. It's just poor writing, man.
Yeah.
There is nothing forgivable about that. There's also like uh, early on we see Qui-Gon Jinn use the Force to make this sort of Force run where he's like fast as lightning,
Yeah.
and we never ever
Never
see a
see it
Jedi
again.
do that again.
No.
Like there's just these little things that it's like real, like on Tatooine
Yeah.
with Watto, and they're trying
Yeah.
to get Nubian parts from. They got a
Yeah.
whole freaking planet, and they don't go looking for another dealer. Like he's the only one on the entire planet that can do Nubian parts, and so they've got to do a deal with it. I just there's some pretty, as you put it, lazy writing that's going on here, and I think that's what it
Well,
all
yeah.
is.
I mean, along with that, I mean, as I was sitting there watching, I'm like, so not only that, but the only way they can get him to trade is to put all their stock on this little kid he's got this broken down pod that he's gonna fix. And I mean, it gets us to the pod race scene,
Sure, which is
which is
great.
cool. But
Happy about that.
I was like, this makes less sense than I remember.
Yeah,
Uh, and I've watched it as an adult.
yeah.
You should. I think I kind of feel like every time you should watch a movie, you should grow deeper in your appreciation of it, and not like, huh, that makes even less sense than I
Yeah.
thought it made the first
And
time.
for me, this was sort of a hit and miss. Like there were things I
Yeah,
did grow deeper in my appreciation,
yeah,
and there were other things where I realized how very far off it actually was.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Well, it's been interesting to revisit episode one.
It has. It's been fun, man. I actually enjoyed getting to see it again
I
and
did
have a
too.
purpose.
I did
Yeah.
too. I enjoyed seeing it with my daughter, watching it
It's so
outside,
cool.
watching the kids
Yeah.
fight with their lightsabers. It reminded me of whenever I fight with my lightsabers, like at home.
Of course.
I don't
Yeah.
even have to
Yeah.
think all the way back to when I was a kid.
No.
I did that
No. Of
last
course not.
week. So,
Yeah.
well, and you know what, Mark? Star Wars is so much fun. What do you
Yeah.
think about talking about another Star Wars show next week?
You know me. If it's Star Wars, I'm in. I am so in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. How about?
And yeah.
Do you have one in mind? Do you have something?
Well, there is, and I've been planning to watch this. I wasn't sure when I was going to start
Yeah.
catching it, but Disney has a new anime series or animation series coming out, or it's out already. Actually, 6 episodes. They're short,
Oh,
like I don't know, 15 each, called Tales of the Empire.
Tales of the Empire. That sounds pretty good. And I
It
think I've
looks
got.
like it's going to be really fascinating. New characters and
Yeah.
kind of going back into the world of the expanding imperial world
Yeah.
kind of thing. So I think it could be interesting, man.
I've got the description up here. It says a
Okay,
vengeful
cool.
young woman and a former Jedi navigate the ruthless galactic empire during different eras, their divergent choices shaping their fates in a rapidly changing galaxy. So that sounds
That,
good.
it should be pretty fascinating through different eras. So we get to see kind of the changing of the empire and how that impacts things. That sounds cool.
Okay, cool. Well, let's watch it, and we'll see you all next time on the Moonshine Jesus Show.
Moonshine